The sky over Rome is overcast. The Sistine Chapel remains silent. Inside, 135 cardinals walk slowly beneath Michelangelo's frescoes. The world waits anxiously for the white smoke. But this time, something unusual lingers in the air. A name that few had anticipated begins circulating among the most influential. An African name, a conservative name, a name that carries with it silence, determination, and unshakable faith. Robert Sarah. While many bet on European cardinals, Vatican diplomats, or figures aligned with progressive thought, he remains in prayer. He does not campaign, avoids interviews, and does not seek attention. Yet his presence is deeply felt. There is something about him that unsettles, provokes, divides, and inspires. Since the resignation of Benedict XVI and the election of Francis, the Church has undergone profound transformations. Pope Francis, even with his message of mercy and inclusion, acknowledged that the Church also needs roots, firmness, and voices, unafraid to confront the modern world. He himself once praised Sarah as a man of deep spiritual life and fidelity to the Church, making him an impossible name to ignore in this new conclave. Robert Sarah was born in a small village in Guinea, without electricity, running water, or access to books. His parents were illiterate farmers. The natural path would have been a life of simplicity and anonymity, but God had other plans. At age 12, he asked to enter the seminary. There wasn't even a Bible in his home, but there was faith. A faith that overflowed in his mother's silent prayers and in the dignity of his father's hard labor. It was in poverty that he learned the value of the essential, and in the anonymity of the African jungle emerged one of the strongest names in the Catholic Church of the 21st century. His rise did not follow the usual path. He did not join the European ecclesiastical elites or attend prestigious universities. Yet, at just 34 years old, he was appointed bishop, the youngest in the world, by John Paul II. Later, Benedict XVI brought him to Rome, and Francis kept him in his post. 3 popes, 3 distinct visions, 1 cardinal respected by all. Pope Francis, even while representing a more pastoral and open wing of the Church, never neglected the importance of Sarah's spiritual strength. He described him as a man of deep prayer and courage, a shepherd who carries the weight of tradition, but with a heart turned toward the poor. While many religious leaders use words to assert their presence, Robert Sarah stands out for the opposite: silence. Not an empty silence, but a silence that communicates, that confronts, that denounces without shouting, a silence that prays while the world stirs. It is precisely through this silence that he has become one of the most influential cardinals in the Catholic Church. When he was made a cardinal, many expected him to become more political, more diplomatic, more attuned to the Roman narrative. However, he took the opposite path. He published books that became global bestsellers, such as The Power of Silence, where he declares that God is silence, and that it is in silence that he speaks to us. For Sarah, the noise of the world is a spiritual distraction. His mission is to remind the Church that truth needs no applause, only courage. This stance even caught the attention of Pope Francis. Despite stylistic differences, the Pope publicly acknowledged Sarah's spiritual depth, stating that, although they may have disagreements, Sarah is a man of prayer who loves the Church. In times of polarization, that says a great deal. Africa, with its cultural diversity, traditions, and vibrant faith, is finally beginning to make its voice heard at the heart of the Catholic Church. And who is the leading spokesperson of this silent Africa, which for centuries was relegated to a secondary role in Vatican decisions? Robert Sarah. The cardinal from Guinea is that powerful and unwavering voice. He does not merely represent an African in Rome, but the face of an Africa that bears centuries of faith, martyrdom, resistance, and hope. In a church historically dominated by Europeans, Sarah's rise symbolizes something deeper, a shift in the balance of spiritual power, a silent revolution that reveals the strength of African faith. Pope Francis, despite his inclusive pastoral vision, recognized and supported the vitality of the Church in Africa. He visited the continent on several occasions, seeking to understand the needs and challenges of African Catholics. For Francis, the Church cannot become a product of Western culture. It must be universal, speaking all languages, understanding all realities. Robert Sarah is known for his unwavering defense of Catholic tradition. In a world where values are constantly changing, he stands as a firm anchor. His conservative stance is not merely ideological, but rooted in the conviction that the truth revealed by Christ is unchanging. In his writings and homilies, Serra frequently warns against what he calls the dictatorship of relativism, a term inherited from Benedict XVI. Serra is especially outspoken on liturgy. He insists that the Mass must be celebrated with reverence and sacredness, directed primarily toward God, not the congregation. His support for the Ad Orientem celebration, facing east, symbolizing Christ, sparked intense debate, especially after he encouraged a return to that traditional practice in 2016. His positions on moral issues are also unequivocal. He firmly opposes gender ideology, same-sex marriage, and abortion. These stances align with the values of many African Catholics, for whom tradition remains central. In a striking speech, he compared certain Western ideologies and Islamic extremism to two apocalyptic beasts with demonic origins, drawing parallels with 20th century Nazism and communism. Such provocative statements demonstrate his willingness to challenge political correctness in defense of what he sees as the fundamental truths of the faith. For Serra, the West is in deep spiritual crisis. In interviews and books, he expresses concern about what he sees as the death of faith in Europe, contrasting it with the religious vitality of Africa. "I fear that the West is dying," he once said, worried that Europe could lose its Christian roots due to immigration and cultural change. This vision places him in a unique position, an African defending the traditional values that many Europeans seem to have abandoned. For Serra, Europe must rediscover its Christian heritage to face modern challenges, including what he sees as the threat of Islamic extremism and aggressive secularism. The spiritual and intellectual affinity between Serra and Pope Emeritus Benedict XVI is profound and evident. Both share a theological vision grounded in objective truth, the centrality of Christ and the defense of liturgy as the highest expression of divine mystery. It was Benedict who elevated Serra to the cardinalate in 2010, recognizing in him a defender of the hermeneutic of continuity, interpreting Vatican II in harmony with the Church's prior tradition, rather than as a rupture. This theological approach continues to guide Serra's thought, and he frequently cites Benedict in his writings and speeches. After Benedict's resignation in 2013, Serra remained one of the most faithful guardians of his legacy. When Francis appointed him prefect of the Congregation for Divine Worship in 2014, many saw it as a balancing gesture, giving a traditional voice influence over the Church's liturgy. With the death of Pope Francis, the Catholic Church now faces a crucial question: who will be the next pope? Many names are being discussed, but few as intensely as Robert Serra, an African, Black, and conservative figure. His potential election transcends mere speculation. The death of Francis has opened an abyss of uncertainty, not only within the Vatican, but across the global Catholic community. His pontificate, marked by a pastoral and inclusive approach, leaves a legacy of love, mercy, and dialogue with the modern world. However, it also generated division, especially with figures like Robert Serra, who opposed many of the reforms. The key question now is, will the Church move in a more conservative direction after Francis? And if it is Robert Serra who leads that path? His name has long been considered among the potential successors, and his rise to the papacy would be a historic milestone, provoking both enthusiasm and apprehension. With his firm stance on preserving tradition, Serra could represent a rupture with the reforms proposed by Francis, but also a reaffirmation of Catholic roots. This would lead to a true reconfiguration of the Church's mission, especially at a time when the modern world seems distant from the traditional principles of the faith. Moreover, as the first Black and African pope in Church history, his election would symbolize a revolution not only for the institution, but for the entire world. It would mark a global transformation, representing the growing influence of the Church in Africa and the importance of the African voice on the world stage, responding to the rapid growth of Catholicism across the African continent, even as it declines in Europe and other Western regions. If Robert Serra were elected pope, his pontificate would likely be countercultural. In a world that prizes speed, he would emphasize contemplation. In a culture of self-expression, he would defend silence. In a society that often prioritizes inclusion over truth, he would insist on the primacy of doctrine. Bets on his election have increased significantly since the death of Francis. His name has circulated widely in conservative circles and on social media, where he is seen as the kind of pope desired by many traditionalist Catholics, especially after a decade of progressive influence in the Church. Sarah has consistently maintained strong positions on issues such as same-sex marriage, gender ideology, Western secularism, Islamic extremism, and the cultural impact of uncontrolled migration. Yet until recently, few believed he had a real chance of being elected. His frankness, conservatism, and age, 79, raised doubts about his ability to garner enough support from the College of Cardinals. Despite his critiques of modernity, Sarah sees hope in the future of the Church, especially among young people seeking authentic and demanding faith. Unlike efforts to make Catholicism more accessible by watering down its demands, he believes youth are drawn precisely to the radical nature of the gospel and the depth of tradition. In his speeches to youth, he often challenges them to embrace a countercultural faith, to resist the pressures of relativism and hedonism, and to discover the freedom that comes from obedience to truth. For him, the future of the Church lies not in adapting to the spirit of the age, but in offering a clear and convincing alternative. Sarah sees America and Africa as the future lungs of Christianity. "The faith of Europe is dying or dead," he once observed. "The Church must draw life from places like Africa and America, where faith is still alive." As the cardinals gather to elect Francis' successor, Robert Sarah's name emerges as a real, albeit difficult, possibility. His election would face evident obstacles. Most cardinals were appointed by Francis and may favor continuity. However, Sarah represents a concrete possibility for rupture. Ecclesiastically, his election would signify a kind of internal counter-reform, a return to doctrinal rigor and liturgical reverence. Despite his age, his figure symbolizes the longing of many Catholics who felt marginalized during Francis's pontificate. The African cardinal channels the discontent of those who believe the Church has stopped being a moral beacon and become an echo of the world. In this sense, his candidacy transcends the electoral. It expresses a deep tension over the Church's spiritual direction. As the world awaits the white smoke, the figure of Robert Sarah remains a powerful reminder that the Catholic Church is truly universal, embracing all cultures and continents. Whatever the outcome of the conclave, his testimony of unshakable faith, courage in the face of persecution, and love for tradition will continue to inspire Catholics across the globe. History is still being written, and the Holy Spirit, who guides the Church through the centuries, will have the final word. In the meantime, the African cardinal remains in prayer, faithful to the silence that has always marked his spiritual journey, ready to serve the Church in whatever mission may be entrusted to him.